Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Finance Town Hall. We have a great agenda lined up for you today, and we will get started in just a moment. But before we begin, there are just a couple of items that we need to cover. Lana, can you advance the slide? Thanks. So everyone has been placed on mute by the host. If you have questions for the presenters, use the Q&A function, which is in your panel, either along the bottom or side of your Zoom window. If you want to talk with other participants, you can use the chat. And we will address questions at the end of each presentation. So there will be plenty of opportunity for you to ask your questions after each presentation. We also have held some time at the end of the meeting to ask questions that we don't have an opportunity to after each presenter's topic. So with that, I will turn the meeting over to Adam Day, Associate Vice President and Associate Treasurer. Adam.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another virtual town hall meeting. Unfortunately, Mike couldn't make it today, so you're stuck with me. Seriously, though, I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak to you all here from my office at Knightsbridge. It was really nice to see some familiar faces in person this morning, even if socially distanced. And as we're going through this milestone of coming back to the office, at least to some extent, I've been reflecting back on the past 16 months and what an incredible period of change and uncertainty it's been. I've talked to a lot of people about what they've done and how their teams have pivoted and dealt with the changing circumstances without really missing a beat. And it's pretty incredible for a university that is not historically known for its agility. You've all done an incredible job being flexible and adaptable and just getting the work done. So for that, I guess I want to say thank you to you all. I know that Mike and the rest of his team are very appreciative as well. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing all of you in real life flesh sometime soon as we start to repopulate the office. So for now, on the next slide, I'll run through the agenda for today's meeting. So first we'll have Brian Valentine, who will talk a bit about the recent 5-year review of the RCM model. Then David Moore will present the fiscal year 2022 budget. And finally, John Fahey will talk about a couple of major projects out of the project management office. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I'd like to introduce Brian Valentine, and I'm going to read this so I get it right. Brian is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Senior Advisor to President Jonathan Holloway. Brian leads a 4-year pilot aimed at tackling major cross-cutting strategic initiatives for the university. The Office of University Strategy works across the various chancellor-led and operational units to develop and help execute plans that move the institution toward a stronger One Rutgers position. In achieving its mission, the office applies an institutional focus on how the various disparate locations and entities can work together to make the whole better than the excellent parts that are currently in place, which is a pretty hefty job, as we all know, Rutgers and its complexity. So I'll let Brian take it away.
Thanks, Adam. And thanks everybody for being here. It's a pleasure to get to share some of the work that we've been doing around the RCM review of the past 6 months. So I will plan to give you some background on the review process and then to run through the major recommendations that came out of the review. I'll plan to talk for about 15 minutes, hopefully a little bit less, and then then we can spend some time for questions at the end. And if you'd actually mind just taking it back one slide, let me give some preamble here. So the context, that last fall, President Holloway asked me, along with Ashwani Mongo, who's the provost in Newark, and Romain Body, who is the Vice Chancellor for Finance in New Brunswick, to lead a 5-year review of responsibility center management. This was a long-standing commitment of the university. We had, when we implemented RCM in 2014, 2015, we committed to it, and the time was ripe, and it was good timing with a new president to come on to take a look at our budget model. It's also, as many of you will know, routine practice for universities to do this every 5 years to make sure that the budget model is in sync with university priorities. So we set out on this initiative to answer really three major questions. One was to assess how the current model was supporting institutional priorities. Another major piece was to identify areas where we could improve the model to better support those priorities, and then to recommend strategies for making the model more transparent to stakeholders, and including improving communication and dialogue across the university. Okay, so that's the preamble. Let's turn to see, I'll give you an overview of how we conducted our work. So to do this, you can see across the top of this slide, we want to consider RCM across our mission critical areas and draw upon many sources of input. And you can see the 5 main areas of exploration across the top, each of which had a working group assigned to it from the group of about 30 committee members that were part of this effort. And then across the bottom, you can see a very intentional effort to be wide-ranging and inclusive in the review. We want to make sure that the report at the end captured the feedback broadly from the community. We know that this is a topic that people have opinions about. And we also want to make sure that we were capturing the good ideas people had for improving our budget model as we formulated the recommendations. We want to really be in dialogue with the various experts from the faculty, staff, administrative sides across the university, both as we conducted the assessment and then formed the recommendations. So let's turn the page. Now, before I get into the substance of the review itself, I want to share a slide that we used quite a bit as we went through our various meetings. And it's an effort to put the budget model in context. This slide shows a sort of ideal view of how budget models ought to operate. On the top level, you see university goals and priorities. These are what drives the budget. The budget is really a reflection of university goals and priorities. Underneath that, you have a budget system, which is the mixture of the budget model and the discretion by which leaders across the university make informed decisions about how we will deploy resources. And it includes the funds that flow directly through the budget model and those that don't. And then finally within it, at the bottom there, you have the budget model itself, which for Rutgers is RCM, as you all know, that is really working in service of these other 2 overarching aspects of university finances and university priorities. Now, one core challenge that we found as we went through the RCM review was that quite frequently RCM was being perceived as synonymous with priorities, and that's simply not the situation that we want. So let's turn the page. Now, before we get to the summary, I wonder if we could pause here, and I think Stephanie had a poll that she was going to conduct that would just help us sort of level set. It'd be great to know from this audience how many people have had a chance to read through the RCM review that President Holloway shared with the community a couple of weeks ago. No right or wrong answers, just to help us put this in perspective. Okay, and Stephanie, will you be able to show us when we have some results?
Yes, Kat will end the poll and share the results right away. It might take a second to transition. There you go.
All right. Well, this is a perfect opportunity then. Let me just drop this in the chat and a link to the report. So after we have this sort of preliminary discussion about it, I'd encourage you all to go and take a look. Your involvement and your understanding of the recommendations will greatly help the university as we move towards what's actually the much more complicated process of implementing and assessing the recommendations made by the review committee. So Lynn, if you don't mind clicking once on your screen so we can start seeing these bullets fill in. I want to run through quickly the 4 main challenges that we identified through the review. The first is that the design of the current budget model appears to discourage mission critical programs and initiatives. And what we heard pretty frequently in our conversations, especially across the academic side of the university, was a concern about the perceived focus on the bottom line and the resulting sense of pressure on academic programs that simply can't break even, of which there are many. Okay, and then second, if you don't mind clicking again, the design of the budget model is perceived as hindering interdisciplinarity and collaboration across budget lines. Now, personally, I would love it if as an institution, we could set an aspirational goal that our university become known as a place where collaboration is both easy and encouraged. But we are not there yet. And in our current environment, RCM is seen as a complicating factor for the really critical work we have to do across schools, campuses, in our many locations. Okay, now third, there's significant confusion over how the budget model operates, what's RCM and what isn't, and questions related to accountability, transparency, and decision-making. And then finally, in a nutshell, as I mentioned before, there's a concern that the budget model is itself standing in for the difficult work of academic strategy, that the budget model is behaving as if it's the reflection of the priorities of the institution. So let me now move from here, and I'll just give you a brief overview of the major recommendations from the report. So first pertains to academic excellence in the public mission. There are concerns about how we prioritize revenue generation over academic excellence. It's particularly concerning for units that are dependent on central budget support. And the recommendations in this area focus on creating mechanisms for recognizing mission critical programs that appear to be financially unfavorable, like graduate education, certain kinds of grants, and mechanisms for recognizing through budgetary means how their work is essential to the university. Next, around supporting interdisciplinary activities and collaboration, the committee discussed at great length the need to improve how the budget model works in service of these collaborations, both in teaching and in research. The recommendations here include doing a very careful analysis of the challenges of doing interdisciplinary work at the university, and then setting clear incentives for how we might facilitate interdisciplinary research in particular. And the research subgroup had some very specific recommendations that you can look at in the report around removing barriers to entry around certain types of grants that are perceived as being financially unfavorable in the near term, but may actually be beneficial to the university in the long term. And then finally, this category around promoting transparency and clarity. This is an area where I would say the committee spent the bulk of its time analyzing questions of how to improve our activities in this area, specifically as they pertain to the transparency of central costs and services. A number of recommendations in this area, including clarifying service level agreements, improving input around how cost centers define their priorities, creating a more effective advisory process, and calling out the need for a careful review of cost center services to look at areas of duplication and alignment of services with the broader areas. Just briefly in the area under communication, training, and terminology, there was specific concern around the language we use, the accounting focus of the language we use, and its creation of a focus on revenue generation, and the benefits of reconsidering some of that terminology like cost center and responsibility center. I'll skip finally to the bottom of this list. Oh, sorry, if you don't mind going back, Lana, one more. There was a great deal of conversation around that third bullet, how we define priorities at the institution, what the process looks like there, the decision-making process for major initiatives. And then this last bullet, a great deal of conversation, especially among the deans on the committee, around how we recognize and think about different types of space to create greater financial flexibility and a real sense of possibility for unloading space. Okay, So that's a very high level view of the recommendations. And again, I encourage you all to take a closer look at the report. As I mentioned, I think the real challenges here lie around implementation. I think we've done a great deal of work to get to a strong sense of consensus around the areas that need to be fixed. But the road ahead is, I would say, several years long. Right now, we don't want to lose any of the momentum around thinking about this. So we're moving quickly to triaging the recommendations along the questions that you're seeing here. How can we think about the areas of greatest impact? What recommendations can be immediately actionable? Where do we really require modeling, testing, and further definition? Certainly, if we were going to make changes to incentives structures within the model or how we prioritize different types of activities, those are areas where we'd want to proceed very carefully to make sure that we don't overly disrupt the ecosystem that is the budget model. And then finally, thinking about trade-offs, and this is the really challenging work, in my opinion. All of these recommendations will require careful thinking about where we have resources. And as everybody knows, we're an extremely resource-constrained environment. And there are difficult conversations ahead about how we might think about prioritizing activities, where are the areas where Rutgers needs to grow. And these all pertain as much to the university's direction as they do to ensuring that the budget model is a reflection of it. So again, much work ahead. And let me stop there. I know, I think we've got some time for questions, and that Ashwani and Romain are here as well to answer the difficult ones.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I'll introduce, as you mentioned, Romain Bataille and Ashwani Manga, who co-chaired the RCM review, have joined for the Q&A section. I'll quickly give their background. Romain is Vice Chancellor for Finance of Rutgers Brunswick. She directs the facilities and financial strategy, management, and planning for Rutgers New Brunswick, and develops strategies that ensure the university's financial well-being, and promote efficient operation. Ashwani is Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor of Rutgers University Newark. He serves as the Chief Academic Officer of RU Newark and supports Chancellor Cantor in promoting discovery, innovation, and social mobility by leveraging the university's strengths, exceptional diversity, high impact research, and role as an anchor institution that partners with all sectors of the economy. And I do want to chime in, the report looks very overwhelming. If you open the full thing, there are a lot of appendices in there, don't worry. But I would also encourage you to read the meat of it to get that extra layer of detail, because it is such a critical thing. And it was a massive, massive effort led by Brian, Romain, and Ashwani. So I hope there are lots of questions.
Great. Thank you, Adam. So Adam just said he hopes that there are lots of questions. We have 2 right now. So I would ask that if you have any questions for Brian, Ashwani, and Romain, that you submit them through the Q&A, and we'll ask them now. So the first question that came in is, in the report, there is a discussion pertaining to, is there a discussion pertaining to student fees? I did a quick search of the document and didn't find the term. Perhaps it would fall under a different term through the lens of the report/budget model.
We don't, nowhere in the report do we discuss, I don't think, specific revenue lines in the university. The report is really intended to be focused around the construction of the budget model itself. We did have a number of conversations over the course of the year with student government leaders about student fees. They were also involved. They were briefed on the RCM review process. They were interested in specifically how student fees flow to student activity groups. In my opinion, these questions they're actually, in many ways, at least from the student government perspective, they were questions that pointed to the work that needed to come after the review, which is to make sure we're educating our community in a more comprehensive way around the flow of funds through the university. Which aspects flow through RCM, where are the decision points, how are the decisions made, to give people a greater sense of transparency and understanding of how budgets are generated.
And Brian, maybe if I can add to that
Please.
answer, because we do have, one of the things that came out of the report was an emphasis on the academics, and of course, students are at the center of it. So things like these are definitely central to what we're doing, except like what Brian said, we're not looking at specific units. Like you won't see any school named, you don't see any specific unit named in the process. We're just looking at the overall mission and how we can align the model with an academic focus that would, of course, include a student viewpoint. Thank you.
Okay, so our next question is why, it's actually a two-part question. Why is RCM important? And how does RCM compare to the current budget system?
Romaine, do you want to handle that one?
Sure. So RCM is our current budget model. So why it's important is that it gets a lot of criticism right now whenever resources don't flow to activities that are important to someone. So the reason this review is important is because the model has a lot of flexibility built into it. And so one of the reasons why schools who operate under this framework do these 5-year reviews is to evaluate where the priorities of the institution are at the time and to tweak the levers and components of the RCM framework so that the current priorities are the ones that are being appropriately resourced and that the desired behaviors of the university constituents are properly incentivized and by the model, and similarly that other activities that are undesirable are disincentivized through the model. So it's basically like getting the blade of your lawnmower sharpened every year. So we're sharpening the budget model so that it can do the hard work that we need it to do in support of the university's mission.
All right, great. Our next question is, so I understand that implementing changes to the RCM model is a longer term goal, but what near-term changes are you planning to implement in the immediate future?
So I would say that there are some activities that we can begin immediately. Some pieces will require more time just because of their complexity, but in the immediate future, one of the major takeaways, at least for me from this process, is that at the leadership level, we need to very quickly begin thinking about how we communicate on a regular basis annually our budget priorities so that people have a stronger sense than they have now about where decisions are being made and how the budget itself, whether it's in their school, at the chancellor level or at the presidential level, how the budget is a reflection of specific priorities and goals. Romaine and Ashwani, do you have other thoughts on immediate steps?
Yeah, I think that some of the things that you mentioned, Brian, in the overview that aren't related to the budget model per se, but more the budget environment and the decision-making and governance. There are several things that can be addressed in the near term around how we communicate through about the cost center budgets and go through the planning process. So we've already begun conversations about improving the cost center discussions and budgeting processes, changing nomenclature around cost pool advisory committees and things like that. So that's already begun. And one of the main things that we found is, the lack of understanding of institutional priorities that then the budget would need to support. And a key activity that's just recently begun in New Brunswick is an academic master planning process that's very important to informing the next steps of, what tweaks we would want to make to the RCM model, because they need to be tweaks that support the priorities that come out of that academic master planning process for New Brunswick and similarly for the other chancellor-led units.
And Romaine, if I may add, one thing I've realized through this process, not knowing much about the RCM model and like Romaine and Brian, was that it's highly, highly complex. And so any change we make has lots of other things, which, it's like a domino. So you have to kind of run through the entire model and then align it with our budget cycle. but the intention is to look at all the recommendations that have come through this and implement them in a staggered manner as soon as possible. That's, so we're looking at each of these recommendations, but like I said, it's, the mechanics are quite complex, and the intention is to implement them as soon as we can and as soon as it's feasible.
Okay. The next question is RCM used by other Big Ten schools?
This sounds like a Romaine question.
Yes, it is. I don't have the exact count in front of me, but Michigan, Indiana is a longtime user. There are several Big Ten schools who use it, but none of them use it the way we use it, and none of them use it the way each other. It's used differently at every school that uses this framework because it's so flexible. So there are a lot of concepts and mechanisms for allocating costs and assigning revenues that are fairly standard across all of the schools that use it. But in terms of all of the nitty-gritty details of how it's implemented, it varies greatly from school to school.
Great, thank you. So along that same thought, why did we change to the RCM model from what was done prior to this model? Does the team believe that this was a better choice?
That's a great question. Part of the motivation for moving to RCM, I think, was historical. And I should say, I think that decision predated any of us who were charged with the review. Rutgers structure has changed a lot over the past 8 years. We incorporated 2 medical schools. UMD&J was using a form of RCM. And we were moving to an organizational structure that was much more distributed than the model that we had been in before the Restructuring Act was passed by the state. So I think in 2013, 2014, moving to a model like RCM, which gives responsibility to the schools and units, was a decision that made a lot of sense. And I think we certainly had a lot of debate over the course of the year about whether or not it was the right model, the wrong model, whether or not there should be something different for Rutgers. And I think where we got to as a committee, which I feel was really right, is that we should take the approach of let's document what the challenges are and let's try to fix them.
And I think one thing that is important to highlight is also that RCM is extremely flexible. And so most of the decisions, including I see some questions here on enrollments from foreign countries, out of state, and so on. These are all management decisions, and it's not an RCM thing. And that's what we realized, that many of the issues that are being raised are a mix of RCM and more toward the management side. And RCM is very flexible. So depending on what our leaders want to do, our deans, chancellors, presidents, what they want to do, it can adapt to our focus. And at this point, we are trying very hard to make sure that everything has a strong academic focus.
Just one thing to add is one of the main benefits of an RCM model is supposed to be the transparency that it brings to the way funds flow and costs are allocated across units. And where we've found that that's not the perception, again, relates more to budget governance and the broader process than it does to the actual model itself. And as Ashwani said, those are things that we've identified in the report and want to address going forward. But transparency and accountability are 2 of the key words that most institutions that adopt this model are seeking to improve.
Great. So I think we will close with one last question. And the questions that we were not able to answer during this live meeting, we will follow up with Brian, Ashwani, and Romaine to get the answers for those and then make those available after today's session. So the following question is, it seems as if many administrative functions and processes have been regularly changing at the university, including RCM budgeting. How are staff expected to remain up to date and knowledgeable of these protocols when they are more complex and time consuming?
Well, I think that's a good question and a fair question. I think that the good news about RCM is that, you know, we've crossed the 5-year mark, and I'm optimistic that in terms of a budgeting model, the turn that we're making now is to make this our own. It feels like we sort of took something off the shelf. We had it at Rutgers to sort of to implement, and now we've done the work to say, okay, how do we make this reflective of our community and our community's needs? I think you'll see if you read the report, there's a huge emphasis on the need to communicate more effectively around how the budget works, how the systems work, and to make it easier to use. And that's the work ahead. So, you know, I think it's got to be a goal for us for a model like this. As Ashwani said, it's going to be incredibly complex on some level because we're a huge institution. But that doesn't mean we can't make a lot of progress on making it easier for people to interact with, understand, and to use on a regular basis.
And we are planning to enhance a website with materials and training and just information about the models that can be available at any time to assist with this.
Great. Thank you, Brian, Romain, Ashwani, for the answers, and thank you everyone for the questions. We could probably spend an hour and a half just on RCM and what it is and isn't, and the complexities of it, but a lot of good work and more to come on that. So at this point, I think we're going to take a 3-minute break, 3 minutes. So ask Alexa or Siri to set a timer for you, go stretch your legs, and we'll see you around 3:36 and change. Thank you. All righty. 3 minutes flies by. Stephanie runs a tight ship, so keep you guys on time and get out on time. So up next, David Moore, Associate Vice President, Chief Budget Officer, is going to talk a little bit about the fiscal 22 budget. David, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to review the FY22 approved budget. At first, I want to just take a little bit of a moment to say that developing a budget in a normal year is a huge piece of work. As you can imagine, that demand was even greater under this year's circumstances. I would like to thank the University Budget Office team, the chancellors, their chief business officers and their teams, senior leaders across the university, and the dozens, if not hundreds, of individuals throughout the university's departments, schools, centers, and other units who each had a piece of putting together this large puzzle. The total FY 2022 budget is $4.8 billion and reflects the values of the university in fulfilling its core priorities of teaching, research, service, and clinical care. The budget reflects a statement of our priorities while providing a recognition of our fiscal limitations that we all face together. Next slide. This budget spends $4.8 billion on the things that are most important to us. In this budget, almost 78% is spent on our core missions of student instruction, research, public service, and patient care. Approximately 14.5% is spent on administration as well as operations and maintenance of our facilities. And 4.8% is spent on auxiliary enterprises, which primarily includes housing, dining, and parking. And last and certainly not least, 2.8% is spent on athletics. Next slide. So now let's explore these expense categories. Classroom instruction and academic support include faculty compensation and staff support for academic units, libraries, and dean's offices. This accounts for approximately $1.5 billion or 32% of the annual budget. Student services and scholarships includes financial aid, admissions, and social and as well as cultural events for students and accounts for $600 million or 12.4% of the annual budget. Sponsor research and other sponsored programs and activities includes funds spent on research and other associated sponsor activities with federal, state, and non-governmental grants and contracts, which accounts for almost $631 million or 13.1% of the annual budget. Public service, extension, and patient care includes agricultural extension programs, delivery of healthcare, support of health care clinics, and community services provided throughout the state, which accounts for over $982 million or 20.4% of the annual budget. Together, these items represents the core missions of the student instruction, research, public service, and patient care that accounts for approximately $3.7 billion or almost 78% of the annual budget. Next slide. Rounding out the remaining 22% of the annual budget includes general administration, which includes support for central administrative offices such as research, administration, finance, human resources, procurement, legal, and the office of the university president, to name a few. This accounts for slightly over $481 million or 10% of the annual budget. Operations and maintenance of all Rutgers buildings includes insurance, fuel, upkeep, and utility costs, and accounts for $217 million or 4.5% of the annual budget. Together, these two above mentioned items represents the administrative and operations and maintenance of the university budget that accounts for almost $700 million or 14.5%. Auxiliary enterprises, which includes housing and dining operations, as well as parking, accounts for approximately $231 million or 4.8% of the annual budget. And athletics includes the 24 men's and women's Division I sports programs at Rutgers, New Brunswick that accounts for slightly over $135 million or 2.8% of the annual budget. Next slide. Let's now turn to where the $4.8 million comes from. What are the revenue sources that support those expenses? Approximately 29% of our revenue comes from tuition and fees. Patient care services includes revenues from governmental payers and private insurers for patient care and accounts for approximately 22% of the annual revenue budget. Almost 19% of the university's revenues come from the state of New Jersey through operating revenues and restricted funds that support a portion of the university's fringe benefit cost. Sponsored research includes grants and contracts from federal, state, and non-governmental entities and makes up approximately 14% of the overall total revenues. While miscellaneous sources, which include student aid, auxiliary enterprises, athletics, endowment and investment income, accounts for 15% of the revenues. Rounding out the sources of revenues includes one-time federal relief funds at 1.5% of the total revenue budget. Next slide. The university is committed to keeping Rutgers affordable while providing the best academic experience for our students. Next slide. Our aim is to keep Rutgers an affordable major public research university in our peer groups, and this financial plan increases tuition by approximately 2.5%, along with a 2.9% increase for mandatory fees for most undergraduate and graduate programs. Together, this increase would be approximately about 2.6%. And for those students that live on campus, room and board and residential educational fees will increase by approximately 2.5%. Next slide. So to show how we compare to our peer groups, for the last 5 academic years, the university has averaged between a 1.2 and a 1.3% increase in tuition and fees. Over these years, we have maintained a lean budget and kept our tuition increases low as compared to the other peer universities. For Rutgers, New Brunswick, we'll look at our Big Ten university peers. Within the Big Ten, our 5-year average increase of 1.2% puts us close to the bottom 1/3 of the group of this group of universities. We have seen over the years that we continue to move toward the right of this chart. Next slide. As we move to Rutgers Newark, we see that we have a different set of comparators than Rutgers New Brunswick. These institutions are similar to our Rutgers Newark campus, and as you can see, at 1.3% over a 5-year period, puts Rutgers Newark in the lower half of this set of comparators. Next slide. As with our other campuses, Rutgers Camden has its own set of peer comparators as well. The 1.2% 5-year average increase is lower than the majority of its peer institutions. Next slide. So thus far, all the information presented that we've talked about for each campus has been gross costs. These costs are easily comparable from school to school, as these rates are publicly reported. However, a great number of Rutgers students do not pay full price when you look at the offering of institutional aid. We put a high priority on keeping Rutgers affordable by providing our students with institutional student aid, qualifying state and federal aid, and grant programs. There are many ways that Rutgers students and their families are able to reduce out-of-pocket costs. This slide takes a look at the student level at each campus. More than 79% of our undergraduate students receive some form of aid. For example, although the total cost at Rutgers New Brunswick is approximately $32,000 based on the previous year's data, the average price to a first-year in-state student receiving aid is only approximately 56% of the total cost. And you take the same view to the other campuses. In Newark, that percentage is 49%, and in Camden, it's approximately 53%. Next slide. And let's go ahead and advance the slide all the way through. Thank you. In closing, I would like to wrap up our presentation of the budget with a few thoughts and comments. While this view of the next year budget represents a move toward a more normal year, and dare we say a new normal, but we won't be there yet. As reflected in the projected overall budget that you will see, there are many concerns about the continuing impacts from the pandemic. If we learned anything over the last year, is that we need to stay nimble and be able to adjust to something we might not even foresee now. The moral of the overall story is to be careful, be prudent in our spending. What are some of the overall concerns that we have? First, ongoing concern about incoming classes and retention. We know that the international student population will not be back to pre-pandemic levels, and the domestic out-of-state student may not be back to the pre-pandemic levels either. The enrollment picture nationwide is less clear than in more normal times, and we will have to work through the summer to bolster the incoming classes and retention. Furthermore, due to the pandemic, overall financial aid needs may stretch our available resources. We also know that the residence halls will not be back to pre-pandemic occupancies. We must retain a certain number of spaces for isolations if needed, but our budgeted amount of 75% occupancy is better than what we saw in the past FY 2021 year. Because of those uncertainties, we need to continue spending controls in the new year. That includes position review, tempering the desire to resume business travels by allowing for necessary academically related travel, and continuing reviews of discretionary spending to ensure mission critical purposes. Much has been made of the funds that the federal government has awarded to Rutgers, and those have been critical in the past year. The bulk of those funds have gone to direct student support, emergency financial grants, enhancing financial aid, reductions of account balances so students continue their academic career, as well as graduate student support. The remaining funds have contributed to our overall technology infrastructure support, supporting remote instruction, personal protective equipment or PPE and testing cost, enhanced student support and health services, and switching to other services like telemedicine and other costs. We must use the federal relief funds strategically in the coming year to help bridge funding gaps in financial aid, student support, in testing and vaccination costs, and in operations impacted by the pandemic. Once these are spent, however, these one-time funds are gone. They must be used to transition to the new normal. As with last year, we will utilize reserves to stabilize operations. These two are available one time only, but they can help during continued uncertainty. And finally, we must embrace what we have experienced and learned in the last year, both in being more efficient and effective in our operations, but also to drive new opportunities for academic programs of interest to our current and potential constituents. These lessons could serve us well. Next slide. Thank you. Through the FY 2022 financial plan, we strive to provide an affordable, high-quality education for our students and achieve academic and research excellence. The next slide will provide a link and web address to the University Budget Office, where you can find more information about the university budget. And here, the first couple of slides, first slide here is our overall revenue by location and the total budget. And the next slide is our overall expense. And then we'll provide a link to the University Budget Office website as well, so that you can have further information on the overall university budgets. This will conclude my presentation. Stephanie, can we open up for any questions?
Absolutely. So the link to the budget website is included in the chat. So sorry about the presentation, but it's definitely included in the chat. So anyone who wants to access the website can do that. And it looks like we have 2 questions in so far. So the first question is a request to have a copy of the Rutgers Newark comparison schools.
Yes, well, that could be provided in terms of giving that information to the presentation when it's posted, of course.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is, so what made Purdue so low on the chart? I think they were even profiled on 60 Minutes.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background on Purdue that I know of. There is some state legislation that required them to, the view that we've looked at was in-state tuition. So there was some state legislation that held their tuition at or near the current level for a number of years based on the number, or based on resources provided by the state. So really kind of more unique to the state and that institution.
All right, thank you. The next question is, hold on. So I understand all the budget challenges, but the staff specifically grade level 5 work a lot of hours and are not properly compensated. What considerations are being made for staff salaries?
So, there are within the budget certainly increases that have been planned and negotiated. And there are some that as negotiations go on throughout the next cycle, certainly that will be taking into consideration the staff salaries and not just staff, but faculty staff.
Looks like we have 2 more questions. Will furloughs continue this year?
Anyone that's currently in furloughs will continue until the end, and at this time we don't foresee, but there again, as one of the things I mentioned, is we need to be prepared for things that we may not foresee.
And it looks like the last question is, will this budget put some money back into the reserves?
This budget currently right now with FY22 is still slightly differential. That's why it's meaning that there is a deficit still. That's why it's so important that we maintain and continue to review our discretionary spend to help close that gap. To the extent that there are differences on the positive side that could go to reserves, that'll be something that we'll see as we progress throughout the year. And something that we certainly would like to continue to see in terms of continuing to put aside reserves. But right now, with the way the budget is currently, we're still looking to close the gap.
And David, it actually looks like we have 2 more questions that came in. So has the fiscal year 22 budget been approved by the Board of Governors yet?
It has been fully approved, yes. And that is when you that website link that Stephanie has provided in the chat. If you go there, you will see the current year FY22 and previous year approved budgets.
And can you talk about change in fund and change in fund balance operations? What's the difference between the 2?
Say the question one more time.
Sure. Can you talk about change in fund and change in fund balance operations? Can you explain this?
I'm sorry. So you're going back to the 2 different. So can we go back a couple of slides? And one more. I'm sorry. Advance one slide. One more slide. There we go. So when we look at once we end the total expense, then when you get into transfers, the change in fund balance really is representing kind of current year activity. So what I mean by that is you have revenues less expense, and then taking into consideration any transfers. So transfers for regular operations and costable transfers. That gives you kind of the current year activity, and then you have change in fund balance operations, which means that the last 2 items, plant funds and non-operating transfers and use of prior year net assets, brings in the potential use of prior year net assets to fund strategic items, one-time type purchases. So those are kind of the change. So you have kind of the change in fund balance in the current year on line 12. Line 15 really brings in the fact that you could be bringing in prior year net assets and also reserves that were saved for one-time expenditures like in plant funds and non-operating transfers. I hope that answers the question.
So David, another question came in that's related to that, asking, can you explain why Camden's change in fund is so much different from Newark and New Brunswick?
So, those changes at each individual campuses were based off of their overall plan. And what we can do is provide the overall, when you see those plans, those are the changes that were based off the priorities at each of those campuses. So that's what impacts the overall change in fund balance.
Okay, the questions are pouring in. You have another one. So does Rutgers plan on offering additional online programs to keep revenue stable in lieu of the losses of international and out-of-state students on campus?
So I know there are some discussions and programs that are being considered, and also to help with students that may be still in their country to kind of help. So I know that those are part of the plans that some of the, or most of the institutions are, or campuses are implemented within their overall financial plan.
Is student athlete athletic aid included in the university's financial aid numbers, or are they part of athletics numbers? The person wants to make sure they're not being double counted, and that's being considered.
So they're not getting double counted. They are part of the athletics program budget, but then when that rolls up to the overall budget, it's included. So it's not double counted, it's just rolling up to the overall total university budget as well.
Great. Got my video. Oh, there we go. Thank you, David. I think that's the last question. We're going to take another quick break, do another 3 minutes. So we'll see you back here 4:01-ish. Thank you. All righty, welcome back, everyone. Now we have John Fahey, who's going to talk about the status of a couple of major projects being managed from the Project Management Office. John?
Thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, everyone. So we're just going to get a couple quick updates on two of our programs now. One is an update to Lease Administration program, which we spoke to you all about at our February town hall. I wanted to give an update on the status of that. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Scarlet Journey, our enterprise CRM program. We can go to the next slide. So our lease administration system, to update you on the implementation, again, we spoke about this in February. We did launch on April 30th, our first release for our new lease administration system that was focused on procurement and finance related functionality. And following that, at the end of June, on June 28th, we went live in production with functionality for our real estate leases and some enhanced functionality for the other areas. So we are going through additional training. We have administrative support in place, but the system is live and in production now for full lease administration and accounting. You can also find additional information on the controller's website about the program. And we're still working on some future improvements, such as our new capital spend guidance policies, some accounting changes, such as new natural accounts, which many of you may have heard about already. We'll be coming forward with some guidance on lease versus buy decision-making, looking at operating procedure improvements and much more as a result of this program. So these are all in development now and will be shared. You can find some further information on the program. We just posted the link in the chat box. Okay, so just wanted to update you all that per our announcement in February, we have launched the system and it is fully in production now. So let's move on to our Scarlet Journey. So to begin here, we'd like to just ask you all to take another quick poll question. We can pull that up. We have our poll question ready?
Yes, it's coming up in just a second. It takes a minute to load.
No problem. So real quickly, have you visited the Scarlet Journey website, our project-specific website? And we'll give everyone a quick minute to answer that. Okay. So as we can see, not many folks have been out there yet. So just a reminder, that website is available. But for those of you who did visit, we just put a link into the chat box to get to the website. You can find updates on the CRM program, not just for what we're doing now, but this website will stay up for the next several years as we continue our implementation. But one of the things we do have on the website is a quick introduction video for everyone. So I'd like to take an opportunity just to play that quick 2-minute video for you now. Lana, if we could launch that video, please.
Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, is an academic, health, and research powerhouse, with campuses located in New Brunswick, Newark, and Camden, and a statewide academic health leader. As the largest university in New Jersey, Rutgers has faced challenges in communicating with prospective and current students, alumni, athletic supporters, donors, and corporate partners. Historically, units within the university have operated in a decentralized manner and have communicated with their respective constituents using effective but separate platforms. This has made it difficult to determine which units have distributed messages and which constituents have received communications about the university. Also, the manual process of responding to inquiries led to many prospective and current students, for example, falling through the cracks. As these constituents' needs evolve, it is imperative that Rutgers provides a customized approach to capture their attention and make stronger connections. In response, Rutgers is embarking on a Scarlet Journey to transform its constituent relationship management, or CRM, experience to cater to this demand. Scarlet Journey will be powered by the Salesforce Education Cloud, a suite of cloud-based solutions that enable better engagement and relationship management, as well as improved insights to inform decisions across the entire constituent lifecycle, from prospect to alumni, donors, and athletic supporters. Benefits include a 360-degree student visibility, enhanced personalized communications, a full lifecycle tool, readily accessible data insights and reporting, integrated analytics, and market-leading technology. It will take several years to build a university-wide CRM with functionality that includes enrollment management, the Rutgers University Foundation, alumni relations, and athletics. Rutgers is dedicated to providing a single unified experience for all of its constituents wherever they are in their journey.
you very much. So what we're going to talk to you about today is the first phase of this program. As the video stated, this program will take several years to complete. We have multiple areas to go into, but we're coming up on the end of our very first phase of the program now, which began 2 years ago, which was focused on enrollment management. You heard David speak earlier about some of the concerns and the need for a focus on attracting and retaining students, and really that our first phase was focused on part of that experience, that student experience, which is the enrollment process, which is where they all start. So the Scarlet journey began with enrollment management. This was a multiple rollout phase. We had 6 different releases. 5 of those have been completed already, beginning in last September, and our most recent was in June. So the first 5 releases have been completed. We currently have over 350 users across enrollment management offices in the system actively today. Can you go to the next slide? And what's to come is our release 6. So release 6A and release 6B will both be in August. This will complete the full implementation of the enrollment management lifecycle. So on August 2nd, we'll release case management, applications, so a new application portal. We talked about 360-degree visibility, as well as the student experience. Students will now have a single access portal, one place to go to do all their applications for, if they choose, multiple different schools within Rutgers. So a new portal is coming out, as well as admission reporting with Rutgers specific reporting functionality. And then following that later in August, we'll have what's called application reading. This is really for all of our different enrollment offices to go through the enrollment and decision-making processes. They'll have the ability to go in and pull all the applications and all the related documentation and go through that decision process all in one place. They won't have to reach out to multiple different areas to find their prospects and find all their data. So a much more consistent experience, not only for our admissions staff, but also for the students. They will be able to go into one place and check on the status of their applications, as well as upload any pertinent information and updates they have. And they will have a single place to go to understand where they sit in the process. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So over the first 5 phases, trying to help measure the success of this program and the implementation thus far, we've been looking at some of the key metrics that we identified early on, which we felt would indicate success of the program. So some of the key metrics over the first 5 releases of the program. We have it released case management in the one-stop financial aid, student accounting, and registrar's offices. To date, we've supported over 125,000 inquiries through the Salesforce platform. I mentioned the 350 plus users already in the system. We've already migrated over 2 million prospect records into our Salesforce platform to really help the respective admission teams support recruitment. We've done over 130 hours of training for the folks who need to use the system, with more to come. We've delivered over 2.1 emails related to enrollment management already in the system before we even accepted our first application in the system. And we've really done a good job of engaging across the university. We have over 80 product owners that meet with us weekly and have been meeting with us for over 1.5 years now. That have been integral in helping us design and develop this new future state system, and to get us where we are today, to make sure we are developing the proper system, not only for our staff, but again, for the student experience. So it's been a great outreach across the university. All campuses are involved in this, undergraduate, graduate, and transfer students. So it really is a fully end-to-end, full enterprise lifecycle enrollment management system. Next slide, please. And that's where we stand today. We did mention in the video, I'll mention real quickly before we go to questions, this is just the end of our first phase. The next phase of this project will focus on Rutgers Foundation. We are beginning that next month to get into discovery and scope requirements for foundation. That will be followed by athletics. And then we will also get into alumni, as well as research administration and corporate engagement to come. And again, that will take us at least several more years, probably another 4 to 5 years. Timelines are still under review, but the next phase will be foundation. So that's where we stand with the Scarlet Journey. Please feel free to reach out to the website or the PMO office if you'd like more information. And thank you for your time. Any questions?
Yes, give me just 1 second. Okay, so the first question that we have is, I received the email about the new natural accounts for leases. Should we be submitting a PO line modification now for our RICO machine, or should we wait for further instruction later in the summer?
I actually do not have the answer for that one, but I will reach out unless there's anyone online who can answer it. I will get you that answer. I believe it's the latter, but let me confirm. So Stephanie, if we can please include that as a post-meeting question, I will make sure to get that answer from the controller's office.
Absolutely. So I'll make another call now. If anyone has any questions for John on lease administration, Scarlet Journey, and I'm sure John would answer any other questions about any other projects that he and his team are working on. You can submit them in the Q&A or I can pick them up from the chat. It looks like right now, John, that is the only one. And while I'm speaking, I'll just mention to you, Vicki asked the question that others probably also have as well. Yes, the recording to today's meeting will be available. We will have it posted on the UFA website. We'll send it out via the same email mechanism that we use to send the meeting invitation. So the recording will be available. It also will be posted on the UFA YouTube channel. And that should be done tomorrow, not by the end of the day today. You're welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Stephanie. As Stephanie mentioned, there will be an email with a link to this recording. I think there will also be a survey, as usual, to provide any feedback on the format of this session so we can make improvements in the future. Just don't make any negative comments about me. Mike will be back next time, hopefully. So that's it. Again, along the same lines of repopulating, I do want to put in a plug for some of the change management sessions I think are still going on, but certainly a time of adjustment for us all. Again, looking forward to seeing you all in real life and working with you again. So that's all I've got. Thank you and have a great day.